engine right now, Officer Mitchell commanded, walking toward the Harley-Davidson parked on the shoulder of a sun-baked Detroit road. His boots hit the asphalt with sharp, deliberate steps. "Take off that helmet," he added. 73-year-old Dolores Washington didn't flinch. Her hands stayed steady on the handlebars, her calm eyes watching the two officers closing in through her side mirror. They moved with the confidence of men certain they were in control. "Did you hear him?" Officer Thompson barked, slapping the motorcycle's side. "A woman your age shouldn't be riding this thing. Where's your family? Do they even know you're out here?" A small crowd began to gather nearby. Phones were raised, cameras started recording. To everyone watching, it looked like another ugly confrontation between officers and an elderly black woman. The story seemed already written, at least for the moment. Dolores finally turned off the engine. When she removed her helmet, her silver hair fell neatly into place. Her posture was strong, her gaze unshaken, nothing like the fragile image the officers had imagined. "Documents," Mitchell demanded impatiently, "and tell me why someone your age is riding a motorcycle like this. It's dangerous for you and everyone else." Her voice was calm, almost measured. "Officer, could you please explain what violation justified this stop?" Thompson laughed, exchanging a smirk with his partner. "Violation? Ma'am, you're the violation. Riding alone like this? That's a public safety issue. We might need to call your family or take you in for an evaluation." Dolores tilted her head slightly, the movement small but deliberate, the kind of control that only comes from years of discipline. "Based on what medical or legal protocol?" she asked softly. That single question made Mitchell's jaw tighten. "Don't try to sound smart with me, ma'am. Cooperate, or we'll handle this the hard way." Ixum. Across the street, a mechanic named James watched the scene unfold. He'd known Dolores for years, always respectful, always punctual, always paid in cash for her Harley's maintenance. But James had noticed something the officers hadn't: the special code on her license plate. Without hesitation, he made a call. "Fort Hamilton Military Base? I need to speak to a superior officer immediately. It's about General Washington." Back on the street, the officers continued their so-called inspection. "Walk in a straight line," Thompson demanded mockingly. "Let's see if your reflexes are still working." Dolores said nothing. Her silence carried more power than any argument. She'd led soldiers through storms, made decisions that shaped lives, and these two had no idea who they were talking to. What no one realized was that the motorcycle's plate carried a classified code. In the military system, running that plate would automatically trigger a high-priority alert, designed to protect senior officers in emergency situations. The crowd thickened. Phones kept recording, and through it all, General Dolores Washington, retired but still commanding, waited calmly, knowing that in moments the truth would turn this scene upside down. If you're enjoying this true story of justice and revelation, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned, because what happened next left those two officers speechless. "Come on, Mrs. Washington," Officer Mitchell said, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he read the name on her license. "Walk 10 feet in a straight line. Let's see if you're even steady enough to handle a machine like this." Dolores kept her voice calm. "Is this supposed to be a sobriety test, officer? May I ask what evidence led you to believe I was impaired?" Mitchell clapped mockingly, laughing. "Look at that, Thompson. Grandma knows her rights. Guess she watches a lot of crime shows." A low murmur rippled through the watching crowd. Someone called out, "Leave her alone." "Don't you have real work to do?" Mitchell's hand went to his baton. "This is official police business," he barked. Dolores didn't move. She watched every gesture, every tone of voice, every ounce of misplaced authority. She had once faced down situations where the stakes were far higher than this. What truly bothered her wasn't the insult itself. It was knowing that scenes like this played out every day across the country, with people who had no way to defend themselves. Thompson spoke into his radio. "Central, we've got an elderly woman on a high-powered motorcycle requesting social services for a mental capacity check." Dolores finally smiled. It was small, controlled the same confident smile she'd worn 40 years earlier when overconfident men at the Pentagon had questioned her strategies. Her mind drifted briefly back to 1982, when an arrogant colonel once told her that maybe a woman, especially a black woman, shouldn't be leading tactical operations. She'd answered then the same way she did now, with results, not words. Only this time, the results wouldn't take months to appear. They'd take minutes. Mitchell stepped closer, waving a paper in front of her. Ms. Washington, sign this warning for reckless operation and consent to a medical review. If you refuse, things could get complicated. I could consider that resisting and take you in. By now, around 30 people had gathered. Cameras were everywhere, recording every moment. To the crowd, it looked like another case of public humiliation. Dolores looked at the citation, then at the officers. Her calm didn't waver. "Officer Mitchell," she said, her voice steady as stone. "May I ask you something personal?" He frowned. "What question?" "How long have you been on the force?" Thompson laughed. "She's trying to turn this into an interview. Go ahead, Mitchell, tell her." 3 years, he said proudly. "And I've seen it all. Don't tell me how to do my job." 3 years, Dolores repeated thoughtfully. "And you, Officer Thompson, 2? He nodded with a smirk. "I see," she said. "You called this a simple situation. Interesting choice of words." Across the street, Mechanic James ended his call to the Fort Hamilton military base. He watched nervously, knowing he had just triggered something that would change everything. What he didn't expect was how fast it would happen. "Central to Thompson," crackled the radio. "Suspend all action against the motorcyclist immediately. Military unit en route." Thompson frowned. "Central, say again." "Repeat, suspend all action. Military unit on the way." "That's a direct command." Mitchell snatched the radio. "Central, this is Mitchell. We're detaining an elderly woman on a motorcycle. Why is the military involved?" The reply came after 10 long seconds of silence, 10 seconds that felt like a lifetime. When the voice returned, it was firm, urgent, unmistakably higher rank. "Officers, you are currently engaging with high-ranking military personnel. Step away from the motorcyclist immediately and await further instructions." The arrogance drained from Mitchell's face. Thompson's hands froze midair. They both turned to look at Dolores, who stood beside her Harley-Davidson, calm as ever. A quiet storm in gray hair and leather gloves. The crowd didn't yet understand, but they were about to witness the moment 2 officers learned the hardest lesson of their careers. Never judge a person by appearance. Thompson stammered, "But she's just an old lady." Dolores tilted her head slightly. "Officer Thompson," she said evenly, "in my experience, the word just usually comes right before someone makes the biggest mistake of their life." The crowd felt it, the shift in the air. Moments ago, it had been mockery and arrogance. Now it was uncertainty. Phones kept recording, but what they captured was no longer humiliation. It was the quiet rise of something powerful. Every insult the officers threw only strengthened Dolores's calm authority. Decades of leadership had shaped her into someone whose confidence didn't need to be loud. What these 2 didn't realize was that with every word, every order barked her way, they were building the stage for their own public downfall. The warning over the radio about a military unit on the way should have made any experienced officer step back. But Mitchell and Thompson had a total of 5 years on the job, and pride spoke louder than reason. "Listen, Central," Mitchell said sharply into the radio. "There's clearly some confusion. We're dealing with an elderly woman on a motorcycle that's barely roadworthy. If she served in the Army 50 years ago as a nurse or a cook or whatever, that doesn't change the fact she's unsafe on the road." Thompson laughed, gesturing to the crowd. "Yeah, high-ranking officer, right? Look at her. Probably some kitchen assistant from back in the day." Dolores stood motionless, her eyes calm but unyielding. She had trained countless young officers like these, impatient, overconfident, blind to the chain of command. In her mind, she was already cataloging their mistakes, underestimating the other side, ignoring intelligence, acting without authorization. "Officers," she said quietly, "I suggest you wait for instructions from command before proceeding." "You're not giving us orders," Thompson snapped. "You're a civilian who shouldn't even be on that bike." Across the street, James, the mechanic, watched anxiously. He had no idea the call he made to Fort Hamilton had triggered a military response unlike anything the city had seen in years. The special plates on Dolores's Harley weren't decorative. They were active codes, part of a protection protocol created after multiple incidents where decorated veterans had been mistreated by local authorities. 15 miles away, inside Fort Hamilton, alarms were flashing on the command screens. General Morrison, the base commander, lifted the secure phone. "Colonel Davis," he said, "assemble 10 general officers immediately. We have a veteran code situation in Detroit." 10 generals, sir?" Davis asked, stunned. "Colonel, do you have any idea who Dolores Washington is?" Morrison's tone hardened. Silence on the line. "She led intelligence operations in Afghanistan for 12 years. She trained half the senior officers on this base. She's a living legend in the armed forces, and 2 rookie cops are humiliating her on a public street because they think a 73-year-old woman shouldn't ride a motorcycle." The line went dead. 15 minutes later, 10 military vehicles rolled out of Fort Hamilton, their engines rumbling toward Detroit. Back at the scene, Thompson was still trying to prove his authority. "All right, military granny," he sneered. "Touch your nose with your finger. Let's see those legendary reflexes." The crowd shifted uneasily. Even those who had supported the officers moments earlier now looked uncomfortable. A woman shouted, "Enough! Leave her alone!" "Citizens, back away or you'll be detained," Mitchell yelled, gripping his baton. And then the energy changed again. Whispers spread through the crowd. People pointed at the Harley's license plate. An older man stepped forward, his stance unmistakably military, even in civilian clothes. "Officers," he said firmly, "do you have any idea what those plates mean?" "Step back, sir," Thompson snapped. "This doesn't concern you." But it was too late. Other veterans in the crowd began to murmur, recognizing the code. They might not have known who Dolores Washington was, but they knew what that insignia represented. A silent understanding passed between them: respect, brotherhood, honor. And at that moment, the low hum of engines began to echo down the street. Dolores stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back in flawless military posture. Her eyes weren't just observing anymore, they were analyzing. She was mapping every possible outcome, every escape route, and calculating exactly how long it would take for backup to arrive. "Officer Thompson," she interrupted coolly, stopping yet another round of mockery. "May I make an observation?" Thompson frowned. "What observation?" "In all my years of command," she said softly, "I've learned that true authority never needs to shout or humiliate. It simply exists." Mitchell chuckled. "Command? What did you command? A kitchen." Dolores smiled, a calm, dangerous smile. The same one she'd worn in 2003, when an inexperienced general tried to undermine her counter-terror strategy in Afghanistan. It was the smile of someone who knew that revenge doesn't always arrive with anger. It often comes wrapped in patience. "Officer Mitchell," she said, her tone almost kind, "in a few minutes, you'll get a first-hand lesson in real command. I suggest you pay attention." Her quiet confidence changed the entire mood. Some of the onlookers lowered their phones, realizing this wasn't humiliation anymore. It was transformation. The woman they thought was powerless was, somehow, the calmest and most in-control person on that street. From the distance came a low, steady rumble. It started faint, like a whisper under the city noise, then grew into something deep and unmistakable. The synchronized roar of multiple engines moving fast. Across the street, James, the mechanic, felt his pulse quicken. He had no idea that his call, meant only to defend a veteran's honor, had triggered the largest military response Detroit had seen since World War II. As the sound grew louder, Dolores's expression changed. Not relief, not triumph. It was the focused calm of a commander about to teach a lesson that would echo for a lifetime, about respect, hierarchy, and the cost of arrogance. Because what Mitchell and Thompson didn't realize was that every word they had spoken, every act of contempt, had been mentally logged by a soldier trained to turn humiliation into education. And then it happened. The deafening roar of 10 military vehicles shook the street. Armored trucks and Humvees formed a semicircle around the scene, blocking traffic in both directions. Doors opened, and one by one, high-ranking officers stepped out. Not soldiers, but generals, their medals glinting in the afternoon sun. The crowd gasped. Phones shook in trembling hands. Even the wind seemed to stop. "What the?" Thompson whispered, his voice breaking. At the front of the formation, General Morrison, commander of Fort Hamilton, strode forward with unmistakable authority. He didn't even glance at the 2 officers. He went straight to Dolores and stopped 3 meters away. Then, in full view of everyone, he raised his hand and delivered a perfect military salute. "General Washington, ma'am." The word general exploded through the air like thunder. Gasps. Silence. Mitchell's knees nearly buckled. "Gut, General," he stuttered, staring from Morrison to Dolores. "But she's just—" "Officer!" Morrison's voice cut through the noise like steel. "You are addressing General Dolores Washington, veteran of 3 wars, former commander of Special Operations, and one of the most decorated officers in this nation's history." One by one, the other 9 generals stepped forward and saluted Dolores. The sight was overwhelming. 10 of the highest-ranking officers in the U.S. military standing at attention before the woman 2 rookies had tried to shame for being too old to ride a motorcycle. Thompson tried to find his voice. We didn't know. She didn't say." "She doesn't have to say anything," Morrison thundered. "The license plates alone identify her as protected command personnel. You were ordered to stand down, and yet you kept going." The 2 officers froze, their faces drained of color. And then, finally, Dolores spoke. Her tone was quiet, but it carried the unmistakable weight of command. "Officers Mitchell and Thompson," she said, "throughout my service, I led over 2,000 soldiers. I trained hundreds of officers, and I commanded missions that saved thousands of American lives." She paused, her gaze steady. "But today I want you to remember something far simpler. Respect isn't earned through a uniform or a badge. It's shown through how you treat people when you think no one's watching." The street was silent. Not a single phone moved. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And as the general stood behind her, the 2 humbled officers finally understood. They hadn't stopped an old lady. They had confronted a legend. Dolores took a single step forward. Even though she was smaller than both officers, her presence made them instinctively back away. "In 40 years of military service," she said, her voice calm but commanding, "I've faced armed enemies, led rescue missions, and coordinated operations deep in hostile territory. And you really think 2 small-town officers with 5 years of experience between them can intimidate me?" The crowd erupted in applause. People cheered. "That's right. Show them respect, General." Mitchell tried one last desperate move. "General, we deeply regret this misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" General Morrison's voice cut through the air, sharp and incredulous. "You called a 4-star General Granny. You forced her through a sobriety test and threatened to send her for a mental evaluation. Does that sound like a misunderstanding to you?" At that moment, General Davis stepped forward, holding a military folder. "General Washington," he said, "here are your updated decorations, ma'am." He opened the file. Inside were rows of medals and commendations. Bronze, silver, and gold. 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, the Distinguished Service Medal, the Legion of Merit. The list went on for 2 full minutes. Thompson's hands trembled. "Ma'am, General, we didn't know." Dolores looked at them steadily. "Officers," she said, "you judged me by my age, my color, and my appearance. You assumed that a 73-year-old woman on an old motorcycle was a problem to be managed, not a person to be respected." General Morrison snatched the radio and pressed the call button. "Central, this is General Morrison, Fort Hamilton Command. I am reporting that 2 of your officers have just publicly humiliated a 4-star general of the United States Armed Forces. We expect immediate disciplinary action." The reply came almost instantly. "General Morrison, both officers are suspended effective immediately. The sheriff is on his way." The humiliation was complete. Moments earlier, they had felt powerful. Now they stood frozen, surrounded by cameras, as the truth of who they had confronted came crashing down. Dolores climbed back onto her Harley-Davidson and started the engine. Its deep roar echoed through the street. The 10 generals lined up in perfect formation as she placed her helmet on. "Officers," she said over the sound of the engine, "today I hope you've learned that real authority doesn't come from a badge or a raised voice. It comes from years of service, sacrifice, and earned respect." With that, the convoy moved out. 10 generals escorted General Dolores Washington through the streets of Detroit, a scene that would soon circle the world as a powerful reminder of dignity and justice. The crowd continued to cheer, recording what they knew was history in motion. They hadn't just witnessed discipline, they had witnessed respect restored. 3 weeks later, the video of the incident had gone viral, reaching over 5 million views in just 3 days. The internet erupted. Those officers are a disgrace. Imagine how many veterans have faced this without cameras. General Washington deserves every ounce of respect. By the following Monday, Mitchell and Thompson were called into the sheriff's office. The meeting was short and final. "You're fired," the sheriff said coldly. "This department will not employ officers who show such poor judgment and disrespect toward veterans." Thompson tried to speak. "Sheriff, it was just a misunderstanding. We didn't know who she was." "That's exactly the problem," the sheriff replied. "You humiliated an elderly citizen based on prejudice. The fact she was a general just exposed what you probably do to others who can't defend themselves." Within weeks, Mitchell discovered that no police department would hire him. He ended up working as a night security guard, earning a fraction of his former salary. Thompson fared even worse. Everywhere he went, people recognized his face from the viral clip. The internet never forgets, and neither did his conscience. Meanwhile, General Washington continued her quiet life just as before, waking up at 5 a.m., tending her garden, and riding her Harley through Detroit's early light. Only now, when she stopped at traffic lights or visited her local cafe, people would nod respectfully and whisper, "That's her. That's the general." At the mechanic's shop, James greeted her warmly one morning. "General," he said, "did you know it would all turn out like this?" Dolores smiled faintly, checking the Harley's tire pressure. "Let's just say," she replied, "I've learned that sometimes the best way to teach respect is to let life deliver the lesson." "James," Dolores said softly as she wiped her hands on a cloth, her eyes fixed on the road outside the workshop. "In 40 years of military command, I've learned that the best strategy isn't to avoid confrontation. It's to make sure that when it happens, it teaches a lesson to everyone watching." The aftermath of that day reached far beyond Detroit. The police department launched an internal review that led to sweeping reforms. A new protocol was implemented. Every officer would now receive training on how to recognize and properly address military veterans. Those special military license plates that once went unnoticed, they became required study material at the police academy. But the changes didn't stop there. Dolores' story went viral and inspired thousands of veterans across the nation to speak out about their own experiences of disrespect. Within months, a national movement was born, calling for greater recognition, empathy, and gratitude toward those who had served their country with honor. 6 months later, General Dolores Washington received an official invitation to Washington, D.C. She was to deliver the keynote address at a national ceremony honoring veterans. Before an audience of more than 2,000 people, generals, politicians, families, and soldiers from every generation. She stepped to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and began to speak. "My fellow veterans," she said, her voice calm and resolute, "our greatest victories do not happen on the battlefield. They happen every day we choose to respond to ignorance with dignity, to prejudice with understanding, and to disrespect with the quiet strength of who we truly are." The hall erupted in applause that lasted for 5 full minutes. Many in the audience had tears in their eyes, not just for the words, but for what she represented. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Dolores rode her Harley-Davidson back toward Detroit. The steady hum of the engine echoed like a heartbeat beneath the open sky. She smiled beneath her helmet, reflecting on the strange twist of fate. How 2 arrogant young officers had given her the chance to teach the most powerful lesson of her life. That true authority doesn't come from badges, titles, or shouting. It comes from respect earned through decades of service, sacrifice, and unwavering integrity. Mitchell and Thompson had learned that lesson the hard way. Their names would forever be tied to the day they underestimated a legend. While they wrestled with the consequences of their choices, General Washington continued her quiet service, not on a battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of everyone who heard her story. She became a living symbol of dignity, a reminder that respect and honor are rights owed to every person, regardless of age, color, or appearance. Because the best revenge, as she had always believed, isn't to destroy your oppressors. It's to use their ignorance as fuel to educate the world about the values that truly matter: honor, respect, recognition. for those who dedicate their lives to something greater than themselves. The story of the general who was stopped by police became more than just a viral headline. It became a modern legend about justice, proving that sometimes the greatest lessons come from the most unexpected moments. Moments when the truth about who we really are shines so brightly that it can no longer be ignored.